Hello, I'm Matthew Amrodiwala. Join me for BBC News Desk. Britain's Prime Minister backs a permanent memorial to Diana, Princess of Wales. The leaders of Egypt, Jordan and the Palestinians end meetings in Cairo by asking Israel to resume peace talks. And India's Prime Minister pays tribute to Mother Teresa after her body is brought to a Catholic church in Calcutta. More on all of those stories on BBC News Desk. That's after this short break. Don't go away.
Unique person. To the end, there was composure and dignity, but this has without doubt been a dreadful week and an emotionally draining experience for millions worldwide.
Peter Byers there reporting. Well, that's it from this special British edition of 24 Hours. Do stay with us for the international news, which follows in a few moments.
From rebirth in Zaire.
Laurent Kabila inherits a country of immense dereliction.
Hope marched into this city on bare feet and weary legs, and Central Africa will never be the same again.
To dating in Beijing.
But the growing imbalance between men and women, which has affected tens of millions of people, is now eroding family values.
From visions of the future.
Wealth, not ideology, is the new battleground.
To ghosts from the past.
Ancient rivalries have come back to poison the air.
The only Russians left here now are those too poor to leave.
The reporters, here to move you around the world. At these times on BBC World.
Travel back in time and come face to face with yesterday's inventions.
I want to make trains the most desirable way to travel.
A musical drainpipe.
I can't imagine why that didn't catch on.
The thing she's sitting in is her own invention.
Make the trip with cult presenters.
Tomorrow's girl could well look something like this.
Beautiful bird.
And inventors of the future.
Aliens are going to help us. They're going to give us new ideas.
Be amazed. Step aboard the Tomorrow's World time machine at these times on BBC World.
This is BBC World. Now BBC News Desk with Matthew Amrodiwala.
The British Prime Minister Tony Blair has given his backing to a permanent memorial to Diana, Princess of Wales. Welcome to BBC News Desk. Mr. Blair wants to set up a new committee to make sure the good work Princess Diana started is carried out. Across Britain, tens of thousands of people spent the day paying their respects to the Princess. India's Prime Minister pays tribute to Mother Teresa after her body is brought to a Catholic church in Calcutta. And the leaders of Egypt, Jordan and the Palestinians end meetings in Cairo by asking Israel to resume peace talks. Hello, I'm Matthew Amrodiwala. The British Prime Minister Tony Blair has given his backing to a permanent memorial to Diana, Princess of Wales. Mr. Blair announced the setting up of a new committee to see how the government could carry forward some of the Princess's work. Later, he had lunch with Queen Elizabeth and other members of the royal family at Balmoral in Scotland. The meeting was arranged before the death of Princess Diana, but it was thought Mr. Blair wanted to talk about ways in which her work and ideas could be taken forward.
After one of the most testing and traumatic weeks of her reign, there was sympathy and warm applause for the Queen as she and the Duke of Edinburgh made their way to morning service near Balmoral. The first weekend in September is the traditional date for the Prime Minister to visit, but these are the most exceptional of circumstances. A week after Princess Diana's death, the day after the funeral, the talk will be of change, how the monarchy must adapt, how Diana's legacy be made to live on. The government's to set up a committee chaired by the Chancellor Gordon Brown.
I think there has to be a permanent memorial. And I think the best way of doing that is, if you like, a lasting continuation of her work. And we will look at this now very closely as to what role we can play.
That'll meet with approval from Earl Spencer, whose powerful address at the Abbey has in many ways set the terms of debate for the nation, what the royal family must do, how an intrusive press needs to be curbed. It's emerged today that before the cortege arrived back at Althorpe for the private burial, there were 2 reported breaches, one by the media, of the air exclusion zone over the family estate. But the Prime Minister believes that curtailing press freedom just won't work.
We need to ask ourselves, and the newspapers, the proprietors and editors need to ask themselves about the restraint that they are going to show, because they will have an immediate test with this, which is how they treat William and Harry.
And a senior member of the Press Complaints Commission and one of Fleet Street's most eminent editors says they must heed Earl Spencer.
On the PCC, we're going to try and make sure that there is a sea change, and we're going to try and make voluntary self-regulation work, and I think we've got to succeed.
The sense of change is palpable. Thousands more came to central London today to mourn Diana's loss, and it seemed appropriate that the Union flag was still at half-mast, even though Buckingham Palace had said that that unprecedented break with protocol would be for the day of the funeral only. John Sokol, BBC News.
Well, tens of thousands of people have still been going out to pay their respects to the Princess at Kensington Palace to sign the books of condolence and at the gates of Althorpe House, where she was laid to rest yesterday. There, the local vicar told a memorial service that people could be close to Diana anywhere in the world, and she wouldn't have wanted the area turned into a shrine.
Kensington Palace almost under siege. Vast crowds standing outside the Princess's former London home, staring at the flowers, absorbing the scent and the emotions. The heaps of flowers, cards and presents keep on arriving, as many as 1 million bouquets. So they aren't wasted. The Spencer family and the royal family say the freshest will start being collected on Tuesday and distributed to hospitals, the gifts to charities. More crowds flocked to Buckingham Palace and around St James's, thousands determined to pay their respects.
Although Princess Diana was buried yesterday, the widespread public feeling there's a need to do something to mark her death remains undiminished.
Hello, thank you for calling the donation line for Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund. How would you like to make your donation?
The Memorial Fund, set up last week in response to those wanting to give to charity instead, can't keep up with the donations. The response, officials say, is huge, but no estimates of figures will be available until later in the week.
We've had, for example, very touching donations as small as 20 pence, a child's pocket money, sellotape to a homemade card, and then we've also had donations in from businesses.
And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle in the wind.
Elton John's specially dedicated version of Candle in the Wind has already been recorded and is expected to go on sale at the weekend. He says this could raise over £5 million, all part of the overwhelming public response to his friend's death.
So much love, and I'm so proud of the way the people responded. It would be nice if they wanted to contribute to her funds in a way they can do it.
In Northamptonshire too, crowds continue to throng the entrance to Althorpe Park. The Princess is buried in private on the island in the lake. She's away from the public gaze, but nothing has yet halted the flow of public sympathy. Jackie Rowley, BBC News.
Church services have been held to commemorate Diana all round the United Kingdom. In Britain's second largest city, Birmingham, a special open-air service, which reflected the city's many faiths, drew a huge congregation. While at the Spencer Family Parish Church near Althorpe, the community joined together to remember the Princess.
Great Brington Church near Althorpe, the family church of the Spencers, and it was a family member whose loss preoccupied this morning's worshippers. But they were warned there'd be no point in anyone coming to Althorpe to seek the real Diana.
May I say to you, she is not here. She is with the Lord. And you can be with Princess Diana wherever you are in the world.
Across Britain, it was the same story of heartfelt tribute. Like here in Birmingham, where Centenary Square was packed by one of the biggest crowds it's ever seen, an occasion that united people of different faiths.
I think people must take away their own message. Things like this take some time to sink into people's hearts. I mean, a lot of things have been expressed, haven't they? Grief, sorrow, thanksgiving, and a sense of being touched at the deepest level of our humanity.
Many Irish hearts have been touched by the death of the Princess. President Mary Robinson, who steps down later this week, led the mourners at St Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. And at Whittington in Shropshire, the bodyguard injured in the crash that killed Diana, Trevor Rhys-Jones, was remembered at his parish church.
We know that he's got a long way to go, but as I said in the service, we hope that it won't be too long before he joins us with a recovery to give thanks.
On this pensive Sunday, normality was abandoned even at Lord's. The start of the NatWest Trophy final between Essex and Warwickshire was delayed for a minute's silence. Alex Kirby, BBC News.
Newspaper editors in Europe could face tighter controls over the use of paparazzi photos. The European Parliament is to stage an emergency debate next week over the death of the Princess of Wales. The editor of the British newspaper The Independent has said that his paper will no longer carry photographs of the Princes William and Harry in private situations. The newspaper has drawn up a new editorial policy towards the royal family following the death of Diana, the Princess of Wales. Well, earlier I spoke to the editor of that newspaper, Andrew Marr, and the BBC's media correspondent, Torrin Douglas. I began by asking Andrew Marr, whose paper's policy has generally been not to carry photographs of the princes in private situations anyway, why he was making this move.
Well, we've carried the occasional photograph which could be construed that way. I think on the Tuesday last week, for instance, we carried a picture of the two of them on their way to the private church service at Balmoral. If you remember, there was a facility for press to photograph through the windows of the car, and because we'd been invited by the royal family and by Grampian police to be there, we were. In future, we won't be.
If the tabloids don't follow suit, though, what hope for this?
I think the policy of the tabloid editors is likely to change. I don't say it'll happen dramatically or by announcements necessarily, but I think everybody is rethinking how they've behaved over the past few years. You could argue that the whole Di phenomenon was a kind of collective madness, something which started off as part of benign propaganda by and on behalf of the royal family, and then ran wildly out of control. It ran out of everyone's control, I think. It ran out of the control of proprietors and editors.
It wasn't that long ago, Mr. Marr, that The Independent weren't running any royal stories at all. That didn't last. So why should this?
To be, because that was never our policy. The policy was that we wouldn't run trivial royal stories. We wouldn't devote half a page to the birth of a prince or a princess. We wouldn't follow people on their holiday. That was always the policy and has remained the policy all the way through. No one in their right minds editing a newspaper would fail to have been gripped and fascinated and awestruck by the events of the last week, and we're no different. But in future, what we won't be doing is invading people's privacy or using pictures that could be construed in any way as invading people's privacy.
Let's turn now to Torrin. Torrin, The Independent have come out with this tonight. Does it make any difference if the tabloids don't follow suit?
I think the tabloids are certainly looking at it as well. As you say, The Independent aren't the first paper you would think of as printing these sorts of pictures. But the Press Complaints Commission actually got to all of the newspapers 2 years ago when Prince William went to Eton, and in fact got them to agree that they would not use pictures of him at Eton. There were lots of paparazzi around the college, and in fact Sir David English, who is a former editor of the Mail, chairman of Associated Newspapers, says all those paparazzi have actually gone away now because nobody's buying them. And in fact, he today said that the Mail and the Mail on Sunday would certainly not be buying paparazzi photographs of Prince William while he's growing up. So I think everyone is looking at it.
How much do you think The Independent's move has to do with the Press Complaints Commission, who are actually looking at the whole situation in an urgent session this week?
I think it's a clever move in that it gives them the moral high ground rather than a significant move, but it does mean that all of the other newspapers must now look to what they're going to do. As you say, the Press Complaints Commission will be looking at it on an industry basis, but each individual paper is at liberty to make its own policy, and if it wants to make that very public, I think readers will sit up and take notice.
Now, Chancellor Cole is reported to have, in a letter to Tony Blair, talked about the possibility of having Europe-wide legislation, saying this is not just a British problem, it's a European problem. Does that offer any sort of answer, do you think?
Well, certainly there are Euro MPs and British MPs who are already raising the debate at the European Commission in various of the chambers there. So it is being debated there. I think that will be difficult, though. I mean, individual countries do have different rules on these things. It's very hard to get a single line that even would hold in Britain, let alone across other borders. And we do know that there is a worldwide market. So even if Europe didn't want to print these things, other countries might well.
Andrew Marr, one former newspaper editor, said yesterday that whatever the editors say at the moment about the princes, it'll mean nothing in a couple of years' time when Prince William starts to have girlfriends, when pictures which could boost circulation are being touted around. Isn't that the case?
Well, it's a very sound point. I mean, it's going to be more tempting when there are such pictures. But all one can do is speak for oneself and the newspaper concerned. I sat through the service. I've not been a great Di follower or monarchist over the years, but I was very moved by what happened, and it seemed to me there was something very straightforward and simple we could do. I think that it depends upon the continuity, the culture in different newspapers. If there is a culture of continuity, if people stick by principles held very firmly for many years, then the whole culture of this can be changed.
Andrew Marr talking to me there a few moments ago. Well, other news now. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called on his cabinet to close ranks over policy in Lebanon and stick to the government line on military involvement there. His demand was a response to public disagreements in the wake of a failed commando raid in Lebanon in which 12 Israelis died. His statement came ahead of the visit to the Middle East this week by the American Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. Meanwhile, in Cairo, the leaders of Egypt, Jordan and the Palestinians met to reach a common stance. They appealed to Israel to resume negotiations and honour existing peace agreements.
With the peace process in crisis, this meeting was aimed at ensuring that these three leaders speak with one voice when they have their separate talks with Mrs. Albright later this week. The message coming out of the meeting was loud and clear. Israel, they said in a statement, must implement the existing peace agreements, handing over more West Bank territory to the Palestinians and halting the construction of new Jewish settlements. With the victims from Thursday's suicide bombs in West Jerusalem still being buried, the three Arab leaders also condemned such acts of terrorism, but they said these were the work of a tiny minority on both sides, determined to wreck the peace process. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, will be telling Mrs. Albright that security must come before anything else. She, too, is pressing Yasser Arafat to clamp down hard on Islamic extremists.
We urge Chairman Arafat and the Palestinian Authority to take these actions and to help create a climate where we can resume negotiations in order to achieve a real peace.
King Hussein of Jordan has moved against the Islamic hardliners. Security forces in Jordan have detained Ibrahim Rocher, the spokesman for Hamas, the radical group which said it carried out the Jerusalem bombings. Another Israeli officer, meanwhile, dies after being wounded in southern Lebanon. After 12 soldiers died there in a bungled operation last week, there are mounting calls in Israel for a unilateral withdrawal from the so-called security zone inside southern Lebanon. But the Arab leaders meeting in Cairo said Israel should resume peace negotiations with both Syria and Lebanon without delay. Jim Muir, BBC News, Cairo.
The Iranian Foreign Minister Kamal Karazi has again said that ambassadors from the European Union who were recalled in April can return whenever they wish. Speaking after a visit to Tehran by an EU envoy, Mr. Karazi added that Iran expected some change in the EU's attitude towards Iran based on what he called the positive assessment of recent developments in the country. The EU withdrew its ambassadors after a Berlin court implicated the Iranian leadership in the killing of Iranian opposition leaders in Germany. You're watching BBC World. Still to come, a safari orphanage, crucial in the battle to save Kenya's endangered rhinos. That's after this short break. Welcome back to BBC News Desk. A reminder of the main news. The British Prime Minister Tony Blair has proposed a permanent memorial to Diana, Princess of Wales. He said it should represent Diana's spirit and her values. Thousands of mourners from all sections of Indian society have been filing past the body of Mother Teresa, who died on Friday after a lifetime's work with the poor in Calcutta. Her body lay under a glass casket at one of the city's oldest Roman Catholic churches. Those who paid their respects during the day were led by the Indian Prime Minister, I.K. Gujral.
Mother Teresa's body leaves the house from which she turned her work with the poor of Calcutta into a worldwide mission. As one of the missionaries of charity's own ambulances bore her to her new resting place, there were outbursts of emotion on the streets.
I love you, Mother.
From street children to the wealthy, people of different faiths and races, many have been queuing to bid their farewell to Mother Teresa in the place where she began her vocation as a nun before starting the Missionaries of Charity. The Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Gujral, came to pay homage too, and said Mother Teresa was to the second half of the century what Mahatma Gandhi was to the first. While Mother Teresa is mourned, the daily battle against hunger and poverty continues in places like this home for the dying destitute she founded in Calcutta.
Mother Teresa is in every sister, in every missionary of charity and in every volunteer.
We are here for Mother. We have done what she's been doing. She has inspired us, and now we are going to inspire the next generation to come and help. And we need, one request is we need lots of people from our own country to help us.
And the scale of the challenge is only too obvious here. So the ordinary people of Calcutta are now joining the dignitaries in paying their respects to Mother Teresa in the way they wanted to. By the time of the funeral on Saturday, many thousands more will have done so. Mike Woodridge, BBC News, Calcutta.
Police in China say there have been riots over the country's one-child family planning policy. They broke out near the southern city of Guangzhou when local residents refused to cooperate with the family planning authorities, who were checking whether mothers were sterilised or fitted with contraceptive devices. 3 people were arrested and several officers were injured in clashes with police. Sport now, and Britain's David Coulthard has won his second victory of the season at the Italian Grand Prix in Monza. Coulthard finished ahead of the Frenchman Jean Alesi and Germany's Heinz-Harald Frentzen. There was little change at the top of the World Drivers' Championship. Jacques Villeneuve, who was 5th, finished 1 place in front of Michael Schumacher.
With the 2 championship contenders back down the grid, this was a chance for some of those less accustomed to Formula One success to enjoy a spell in the limelight. John Alesi, who had started from pole position for only the second time, held on to the lead ahead of Frentzen and Coulthard. And that's how the positions remained until the mid-race pit stops. With Frentzen the first to refuel, attention switched to Alesi and Coulthard. The 2 entered the pits together, the Frenchman just a second ahead. Now it was all down to the speed of the teams. McLaren proved quicker, Coulthard emerged first, and the Scot could contemplate a second win of the season. Further back, there was a lucky escape for Johnny Herbert. A collision with Ralf Schumacher sent him crashing into a tyre barrier, but the Briton stepped out of his car unhurt. No such scares, though, for David Coulthard, who reached the checkered flag 2 seconds ahead of Alesi. For the 3rd time, he was at the top of the podium, but the Scot knew that this victory was different. Union flags were waving in celebration once again. James Pearce, BBC News.
One other sports story. In the women's final of the US Open tennis tournament in New York, Martina Hingis has won her 3rd Grand Slam title of the year. Hingis, the world #1, brushed aside the American Venus Williams in straight sets, 6-love, 6-4. And in the men's final, being played right now, Pat Rafter is beating Greg Ruzetsky by 2-1. Now, Kenya's endangered rhino population has dwindled from over 20,000 to about 500 in the last 10 years. Even in national parks, where poaching has largely been controlled, the stress of living in close proximity to humans has taken its toll. But one woman who's committed herself to the rehabilitation of orphaned rhinos, whose parents have either been killed by poachers or injured as a result of contact with humans and their machines.
An orphan at an early age. This 7-month-old female calf in Nairobi National Park was separated from her mother. She is no longer accepted by other rhinos, and as an outsider, she could be killed by them. For a young bull, also 7 months old, it's the same story. His mother was paralyzed in an accident and had to be put down. Exercising these young babies safely is not easy.
When we're walking the babies and come across wild rhinos, we leave quickly.
The 2 rhinos are being cared for in an animal rehabilitation centre in the national park. The first step has been for an animal handler to build up a relationship with them. Names are important.
The male one, the male one, Manginam, and the female one, Manginus. Yes.
Rhinos are a special tourist attraction, and never more so when they are this small. But these baby rhinos have to be reintegrated into the wild.
We raise the orphans, both elephants, rhinos, and any other animal that we can offer quality of life to in wild terms. So that's what we specialise in, the reintegration back into the community.
To achieve this, the handlers walk with the baby rhinos for hours each day, pointing out where the other rhinos are. They hope that the young ones, by leaving some of their scent behind, will become familiar to the other rhinos and will eventually be accepted by them. At the rehabilitation centre, they are fed full cream milk formula every 6 hours to build up their strength. But it's not only the physical well-being that's important, so is emotional support.
They're not the sort of primitive, dangerous animals that people that don't understand them think they are. They're complicated, complex animals, and everything's working with chemistry, scent and hearing, and a phenomenal memory. Rhinos are a horse family, so they're very fast.
Magnum and Magnet will stay at the rehabilitation centre until they are 3 years old and 3/4 grown. By that time, the male could weigh more than 1,500 kilos, too big for the handlers to control. So everyone hopes desperately that their reintegration will succeed. Kathy Jenkins, BBC News, Nairobi.
Just to recap the main news, the British Prime Minister Tony Blair has proposed a permanent memorial to Diana, Princess of Wales. Now we say goodbye to our viewers in Canada. Coming up in a moment on World Business Report, the UK's trade unions meet as a new survey shows industrial action is increasing. That's after this short break.
Hello, welcome to this look at the world's weather. Let's start first of all in South America. Now, as you can see, we've got some cloud across the central and southernmost areas. That's moving away though. More cloud down to the very far south is going to push its way in to the south of Chile and Argentina though, bringing with it a lot of rain during Monday and also a good deal of cloud, some snow for the higher ground. Further north of that though, it remains dry and fine across this continent, a good deal of sunshine, but some showers in the far north and they could be heavy and thundery. As we head up into the Caribbean, we've got some very stormy weather in the form of a hurricane here. Erika is working its way in gradually. It's not really moving too much at the moment, but it has increased in size. And certainly I think Puerto Rico and some of the Virgin Isles and even the Leeward Islands could see some fairly heavy downpours of rain associated with that. Now this is where it went through Sunday afternoon, but it is going to continue working northwestwards for a time before pushing away eastwards. So it'll head back into the ocean, causing no more problems. But gradually, Erika's still giving some heavy showers around these areas then for the next couple of days. Sunshine across parts of the Caribbean and up into Florida as well. But at the moment, you can see across North America, we've got these bands of rain working their way eastwards. That's really the theme for the next couple of days. Weather fronts giving some rain every now and again, but high pressure readily following in behind with some drier and brighter conditions. So let's take a look at one or two cities for the next few days then. Toronto